Spring comes early to Herefordshire, and the wild snowdrops in February are a treat we look forward to every year. Later, the orchards are white with damson blossom, soon to be followed by cherry and apple. There's something special about our county of Herefordshire, whatever the season of the year. The land here is rich and fertile, so it's not surprising that this is an important agricultural area. Everyone has heard of Hereford cattle. For the people here who live close to the land, spring is a busy time, so it seems right that we should begin our journey through the year on a farm. But this is a farm with a difference.
Our family has farmed here since the beginning of the century, and David was born in this farmhouse. Today, we're basically a modern dairy farm with a herd of 100 cows. We also have a wide variety of other animals, some of them quite unusual, but as you can see, they all seem to get on fairly well together. We don't go in for intensive methods. We prefer the traditional style of mixed farming, which is still very popular with most of the smaller farms in Herefordshire. But I suppose what makes us different from other farms is that we're open to visitors for 2/3 of the year. So, on certain days, people can come along and see how the farm is run. Children love it here. We involve them in the everyday activities, like collecting eggs, which sometimes turn up in unusual places, and feeding the animals. They can even try their hand at milking the cow, the old-fashioned way, before seeing how modern machinery has simplified this task. Our collection of old farm implements and other machinery is a reminder of how much our lives have changed since David's great-grandparents used to farm here. The younger children thoroughly enjoy themselves in the play area. They can also make friends with the rabbits and guinea pigs. Here at Shortwood, we're 600 feet high, so the views are wonderful. The best way to enjoy them is to follow the farm trail across the fields and into the woods, which are carpeted with wildflowers, especially in the springtime.
Herefordshire is daffodil growing country. People come to admire the fields where they're grown commercially for their bulbs and blooms. But this glorious sight is something you'll not often see. Only the local people know where to find wild daffodils like these. Of course, there's more to Herefordshire than its landscapes. The countryside is dotted with interesting little towns, such as Ledbury, beautifully set in the foothills of the Malvern Hills. There's been a market here since 1665, and it's still going strong. Just around the corner, a cobbled lane leads up to the church. It's full of interesting old houses. Part of this one now houses the local tourist office. In one of the upper rooms, they've made an exciting discovery. During the restoration work in 1990, these Elizabethan wall paintings were uncovered, having been buried for centuries under layers of plaster and paper. It's quite rare to find such decoration in smaller houses of the period, but this is thought to have been the home of the town constable, responsible for law and order in the marketplace, and it was here where he would have held his court of summary justice. The place had to look impressive. Some of the panels contain biblical texts, no doubt intended as a warning to the offenders who found themselves here. Originally, both paintings and texts would have covered the whole of the walls, including the oak beams. The paintings were probably copies of panelling and silk tapestries of the kind found in grander houses. There's lots more to discover in Ledbury. It was once a post town on the Royal Mail route between Cheltenham and Aberystwyth. And here, at the Feathers Inn, the weary travellers could rest themselves and the horses could be changed. During the Civil War, Prince Rupert had his headquarters here at Ledbury Park. The nearby castle of Eastnor has a much shorter history. It actually dates from the early 1800s, but is everybody's idea of a medieval castle. And it's a magnificent building, well worth a visit. The parkland around the castle is also very impressive, with its herds of deer and fine trees. Unlike the castle, this old yew tree really does have a long history. They say it stood here for well over 1,000 years in the churchyard at Muchmarkel, a village some 5 miles west of Ledbury. On the other side of its huge trunk, there's a surprise waiting. Why do you think this yew tree was planted here? Inside the church, you'll find the tomb of Walter de Hellion. His family were custodians and later owners of the nearby manor, known as Helen's. To reach Helen's, you follow a narrow track known as the Monk's Walk, where the monks who first lived here used to make their way to and from the church. At the end of the track stands the medieval manor house, and it's a real gem. It has everything you associate with a place like this. Tales of ghosts, secret passages, and a whole pageant of English history. This is the minstrel's gallery above the Great Hall. Here, in 1326, Edward III, as a young boy, received the royal seal from his father's enemies, who had just captured the king and were soon to murder him. One of the main conspirators in this dastardly plot was Roger Mortimer, whose sister owned Helen's. He also happened to be the Queen's lover. Years later, Edward's own son, the Black Prince, dined at this same stone table after the Battle of Crecy. Above the fireplace you can see what is probably the earliest rendering of the Prince of Wales's emblem, carved in his honour for that occasion. Another famous visitor was Mary Tudor, or Bloody Mary. These chairs were made specially for that visit. This amazing house has so many stories to tell that it really is a must for anyone interested in history. Spring swiftly changes to summer, and high on the hill behind the village, Farmer John Farrington is preparing his Shire horses for the season shows.
I've always been interested in Shire horses right from when I left the cradle. Great characters, they're part of me and I'm part of them. I must say, I sort of love them. It's a second friend to me, a Shire horse. They are very strong horses, but they're very, very easy to handle. Like, oh, Shire is very intelligent. You can tell it to stop, go, right, left, and it'll do it, you know. I don't think there was ever a riding horse. They're far too wide to ride. Folks talk about knights in armour and all that, you know, but I just can't believe it myself, because I can never ever see a Shire horse ever going fast enough. Well, they were bred for ploughing, farm work, weren't they? To have a good Shire horse, you've got to have depth in the shoulder, so as he's able to pull, his hocks got to be together at the back, so as he got power at the back to push. We use them at ploughing matches. We've had several geldings we've worked at ploughing matches. Some folk work them on the farm, but I prefer the tractor, you know, it's a job in the dry. I love showing. First of all, they've got to get them quite fit for the show, which is a 3-month job. It's no good taking a bag of bones to a show. You've got to get it in real first-class condition. Oh, my daughter, she's very interested in showing these horses. She loves to show the horses with the gears on. I don't really know the origin of the horse brasses, but some folks say is they're to keep the evil spirits away, and others have different opinions. Myself, I think we put them to beat our next door neighbour to know as we've got better brass than them. Well, the bells are more or less used as a motor horn at a show, you know. They warn the crowd to step at one side so as we can come by. We go to several shows. I would say 10, 12 in a season. I don't always win, but I try to. We always like to do our very best, and we always like to put on a damn good show for Bromyard. They get quite a big crowd there, in the region of 6,000 to 8,000 to 10,000, and we get quite a lot of folks with a lot of interest asking us a lot of questions that we can't always answer.
Mr. William Morris, accompanied by the Vice Chairman of Bromyard Gala Society, Mrs. Hubber.
Now, Bromyard Gala, that's worth a visit. It's held in July and we never miss it. You see, there's so much going on.
It's an agricultural engine.
Use the throat the clays as good as well as you can the dogs, you'll be right, Sandra. Again, no hesitation from the other dogs, stays where they were told. Dogs can run around them. An 1824 Bullnose Morris, owned by Mr. Dennis Milner, just going away from me. Complete with full complement of passengers. Now I've got number 6, is a 1922 Royal Enfield, owned by Mr. Whiting of Cardiff. That's a 225cc machine. Number 26 here in front of me now. This is a 1938 Bruff Superior.
Right, let's see what you can do. Ooh. Ah, now this looks promising. Now, we don't give riding lessons either. Now, how are you going to get off, Ray? Ooh. Stay with him. Right. You've got to get off sometime, Ray. Whoa! Well done. That was a smashing ride. Well done.
We will be doing a helicopter takeoff flight. This evening after we finish packing our parachutes. We're coming on now for my final appearance into the arena.
There you go. Once again, a safe landing. Here comes number 2. Yes. Complete with colour supplements.
One of these girls was saying how lovely the countryside looks from the air. And here's another group with the same idea. In a field near Hereford, on a warm summer's evening, they're preparing for a flight over the Wye Valley. we're going with them.
Within these sort of baskets?
There is an altimeter down there as well.
Oh, the altimeter is sort of accurate. You found out where we are?
Oh, yes, that's just south of Worcester.
Hereford, I mean. Yeah.
Dragging in the stationary air, and the sails in the moving air, that's moving us along.
The distance from travel, roughly, down here? 5, 6 miles?
Surprisingly more than that.
Yeah?
Like upwards of 10, I think. That far across the ice man. 8 miles, is about an inch to the mile. Working kilometre. Hello! Please bend. Landing position.
Of course, if you're not too keen on heights, there are other leisurely and pleasant ways to explore the Wye Valley. Whichever way you choose, you won't be disappointed. The scenery is quite spectacular. This is the view from Simmons Yacht Rock. And if you're lucky, you may see more than the view. It's here that peregrine falcons nest in the rocky crags above the river. The whole area is rich in wildlife. But if you'd like to see something a little more exotic than our native fauna, you can't do better than this magical place, the world of butterflies at Simmons Yacht West. It's a paradise for children and photographers. There's more fun for the youngsters at the nearby Jubilee Maze. There's also a unique museum of mazes and a shop that sells nothing but puzzles. All this and more can be found at the Jubilee Park, an ideal place for a family outing. Further up the river, at the little town of Ross-on-Wye, You can relax by the waterside, explore the twice-weekly market, or even step back in time at the Lost Street Museum, which shows what shopping was like between 1885 and 1935. Today, Ross is a popular centre for touring, particularly during the summer months. The River Wye is famous as one of Britain's best salmon rivers. It's good for both game and coarse fishing and attracts fishermen of all kinds. The Wye is only one of several lovely rivers which flow through Herefordshire. This is the River Dore. Its surroundings are known as the Golden Valley, and they say it's called golden because the Normans didn't understand Welsh. When they heard the Welsh word dŵr, meaning water, they thought of it as d'or, the French for golden. Still, it's a nice name, Golden Valley, for a lovely, unspoiled part of the country. Its peaceful roads are very popular with walkers and cyclists. This party has stopped off to visit Dore Abbey, which was once the home of the Cistercian monks. They were a simple order who liked to live in out-of-the-way places where they could follow their quiet, hard-working lives, farming the land. Further north, perched high above the valley on Murbach Hill, is a mysterious megalithic tomb known as Arthur's Stone. Legend has it that the famous king once killed a giant on this spot. There are also some splendid views from around here. As you come down the hill on the other side, look out for the village of Bredwardine, with its little church standing among fields by the River Wye. It was here that Francis Kilvert, well known for his diaries, was vicar from 1877 to 1879, and where he died tragically in the prime of life, only 5 weeks after his marriage. But he left us a vivid account of country life in Victorian times, which was often harsh, cruel, and short, especially for the poor. On Christmas Eve, 1878, Kilvert wrote,
"After breakfast I went to the Old Western to see the poor Davises and comfort them concerning their child."
That child was the shepherd's son, little Davy, whose grave can still be seen in the churchyard close to that of his parents. And the cottage where they all lived is still standing in the fields outside the village. This place hasn't changed much since Kilvert's day. Many of these sights and sounds would have been familiar to him.
Yesterday a new wire bird door was hung at the main door. We have been much troubled by birds in the church lately, and have been obliged to close the painted east window to keep out the swallows who were darting in and out with mud and building a nest against the wall just over the altar. I was sorry to interfere with them, but it was necessary, for they were scattering mud all over the place.
Also well known to Francis Kilvert was the neighbouring border town of Hay-on-Wye. Nowadays it is famous for its second-hand bookshops, the largest number to be found anywhere. Near Hay runs the Offa's Dyke footpath, a favourite with walkers. It follows the route of the great earthworks thrown up by the Saxon king Offa.
There was, not long since in Mercia, a certain able king, Offa by name, who was feared by all the kings his neighbours and by all the nations round about, who also commanded a great dike to be made from sea to sea, between the land of the Britons and Mercia.
His main reason for building this amazing dike was probably to define his own boundary, but also to keep livestock from straying across the border, and of course to keep the fierce Britons at bay. Later, the Normans decided that this wasn't good enough, and their answer to the problem was to build a number of strong castles along the boundary. Many of these can still be seen, though most have been reduced to a few ruins. One of the best preserved is the castle at Goodrich, and there's enough here to remind us of how it might once have been. From time to time, Goodrich plays host to exciting events which can make its history come alive for today's visitors.
So try to stand Alexandra.
But let's escape now from the warring of men to the peace and beauty of nature, which is never far away. In summer, the hedgerows lining the Herefordshire lanes are full of sweet-smelling wild flowers, and these lanes and roads link some of the prettiest villages in the county. In bygone days, when wood was plentiful, people used to build their houses with timber frames, and well built they were to survive like this down through the centuries. These houses belong to Pembridge, and so does this quaint old marketplace with a 14th century inn next door. One of several where you can refresh yourself on a hot summer's day. The church is interesting too, with its strange wooden belfry standing alongside. Just a short distance away is Erdesland, a really lovely village on the River Arrow. There are others too, like Webley, dating back to the 7th century. A perfect example of a black and white village. There's an air of mystery about this place. They say that in the 18th century, it was associated with witchcraft. Then there's Dilwyn, clustered around its attractive village green. And Erdesley, Saxon in origin. All these houses are framed in English oak. But they missed this one, which still stands near Erdesley and has carried on growing until its trunk is now 30 feet in circumference. The church at Lyons Hall stands on a steep bank above the village. In the village itself, the George Inn dates from the 16th century, and even the local shop is picturesque. All these places, and others, are best seen by following the black and white village trail, described in a handy guide which you can pick up in any of the local tourist offices. The trail starts and ends at Leominster, an historic town, named by the Saxons, so they say, after Lady Godiva's husband, Leofric, Earl of Hereford. He built a Saxon nunnery here, although I'm afraid his son disgraced it by running off with the abbess. Later it changed into a Benedictine priory, of which there now remains only the church and the priory hospital, which was once the prior's house. Inside the church, you'll find this curious relic from the past. It's a ducking stool, used to punish erring tradesmen and scolding wives. The monks used to breed sheep, and their fleeces brought prosperity to the church and to the town as well, as you can see from all these fine buildings. Some of them have now become antique shops, and there are plenty of these in Leominster. It's a very good place for treasure hunters. After a hard day's work in the fields, how many folk must have made their way to these inns for a good mug of ale? It would no doubt have been brewed from local hops. Hops have been grown for centuries in Herefordshire. You can still see many of the old drying kilns, though some have found another use. The growing and harvesting of hops continues. Each September, the local pubs decorate their bars with fresh hops, and it's around hop harvesting time that Bromyard holds its annual folk festival. Now that can't be just coincidence. Suddenly, this peaceful town is full of colourful characters. And everywhere there's music and dancing. Everybody's having a good time, helped a little perhaps by a generous appreciation of the local brews. Just 3 miles or so from Bromyard, set in a lovely valley, you can find a place that has hardly been touched by the passing of time. The unusual manor house at Lower Brockhampton, owned by the National Trust, is one of the finest examples of a half-timbered medieval building. Its surrounding moat was originally designed to protect it from unwanted visitors. But today's visitors are more than welcome. Near the house stands the ruins of a Norman chapel. All this right in the middle of what is still a working farm. As the days grow shorter, these old buildings look even better in the mellow autumn sunshine, and so does the countryside. I've chosen autumn to show you our fine city of Hereford, although it's a good place to visit at any time of the year, full of bustle and activity. The jewel in Hereford's crown is its splendid cathedral, which has stood here, overlooking the River Wye, for 1,000 years. It is dedicated to the Blessed Virgin Mary and to St. Ethelbert, King of the East Angles, who was brought here after being murdered by none other than our old friend, King Offa. Offa lured him with a promise of marriage to his daughter, only to have him beheaded on the eve of the wedding. Hereford's magnificent Norman cathedral holds many treasures. Let's look first at the chained library, the oldest in the world, containing some 1,500 priceless books, including the 8th century Anglo-Saxon Gospels, given to the cathedral by Bishop Athelstan in 1056. You can also see some of the earliest books printed by William Caxton. This is Ptolemy's hand-coloured Geographia, printed in 1486. Though this map may seem a little odd, stranger still is the cathedral's greatest treasure, the Mappa Mundi. But let the cathedral chancellor, Canon John Tiller, tell you about it.
It's a mystery how this extraordinary document came to Hereford, but here it is, the oldest wall map of the world to be seen in Europe, hanging in its place of honour in the cathedral treasury. It draws fascinated visitors from all over the world, trying to identify their own countries. Not that it's easy, because this map speaks to us from the Middle Ages, and the world, as it seemed to our forefathers around 1290, was very different from the one we know today. Drawn on a large piece of vellum or calf skin, and written in Latin and Norman French, the map is circular in shape. However, that doesn't mean the author necessarily believed the world was round. It was traditional in those times for such a map to be drawn in the form of a diagram, dividing the world into 3 continents: Europe, Asia, and Africa. The rest of the world had yet to be discovered. At the top of the picture we can see Christ in majesty, sitting in judgment above his world. On either side, the souls of the dead are on their way either to paradise or to hell. The Holy Land was thought of as the centre of the world, so it follows that Jerusalem is to be found here in the middle of the map. Because of its importance, East is at the top. But if we turn the map round in our minds so that North is where we would expect to find it, it begins to make a little more sense. After 700 years, the bright colours have faded and darkened, and the details are rather difficult to see. So we'll use this 19th century replica, which is clearer, to show you something of this bizarre medieval world. Here we see the Mediterranean, with the countries around it. Right at the bottom is Spain, distorted in shape to fit the contours of the picture. The Pillars of Hercules mark the Straits of Gibraltar. Cities and towns are represented by towers, castles, or temples. This one, Santiago de Compostela, the shrine of St. James, is an important place of pilgrimage. Next comes France, divided from Spain by the Pyrenees, with Paris magnificently depicted on the banks of the Seine. Italy is not boot-shaped as we know it. Like all the land masses, it is smooth and rounded. Rome, of course, is clearly marked as befits its importance, and Venice is shown as an island in the Adriatic Sea. The author's knowledge of Greece and its mythology seems a little hazy. However, we can see Athens, and the island of Crete, complete with its labyrinth, is easy to find, as are the other Mediterranean islands. Sicily seems to have drifted away from Italy, but it's roughly the right shape, and we can distinguish Mount Etna erupting fiercely. This foot-shaped island is Sardinia, and these are the Balearic Islands. The writing tells us that the people of Minorca were skilled at using the sling. On the African side of the coast, a fine castle marks Carthage, and further down St. Augustine is standing under a canopy. The map's purpose was not only geographical, but was also designed to educate and inform. So, for example, in the Holy Land, we find illustrations of Bible stories. Here is Lot's wife, looking a little wistfully towards the Dead Sea, where Sodom and Gomorrah are submerged. And here is the Tower of Babel. Beyond the boundaries of the better-known parts of this world, imagination is allowed to run riot. Fueled no doubt by travellers' tales, we're treated to a terrifying array of strange men and beasts. Unsuspecting travellers to India, for instance, might have been startled to stumble upon the strange skiapod, sheltering himself from the sun with his one enormous foot. In Africa, they would be on their guard against the basilisk, a bird-like creature which could kill with one glance. and the extraordinary men with faces on their chests. In Egypt, we find the mysterious mandrake, half man, half plant, and many other curious creatures. So it's quite reassuring in their midst to come across the familiar story of Moses receiving the tablets of stone and the Israelites worshipping the golden calf. To the north, further hazards await our intrepid traveller. In these desolate lands, the polar bear was the least of his worries, for he might have encountered, among other monsters, the minotaur, the ferocious Hyrcanian tiger, or a race of dog-headed people, to say nothing of the griffos, who used their enemies' skins as horse trappings. But what of our own country? Yes, the British Isles are surely here, albeit hard to recognise. Scotland and Cornwall are shown as islands, and Wales and Ireland are strangely elongated. In Ireland we can identify Kildare and Armagh. In Scotland, Edinburgh and the Grampians. And in Wales, St David's, Carnarvon and Mount Snowdon. As for England, many places can be found, including London, Ely, Lincoln, York, Durham, Gloucester, and in keeping perhaps with a map so full of interest and surprises, even our own city of Hereford has not been forgotten.
Besides visiting the cathedral, there's a lot more to see and do in Hereford. Unfortunately, we can't show you everything. But here is one place which is sometimes missed, and it shouldn't be. The Blackfriars Monastery once stood on this site, and from its ruins in 1614, Sir Thomas Coningsby built a hospital and cottages for old soldiers.
Thank you very much indeed for your support.
Today, the old hospital houses the St. John Medieval Museum, which tells the history of the Knights Hospitaller of the ancient Order of St. John and the part they played in the Crusades. This skeleton, found during excavations, is thought to be that of one of the 14th century monks. The poor man died in his 40s, not having enjoyed very good health. Apparently he suffered, among other things, from rickets, osteoarthritis, and a blood disorder. The small chapel adjoining the old hospital is still in use today. As you walk around it, you may get the feeling you are being watched. Patients on the upper floor used to follow the service in the chapel from this window. Of course, some couldn't make it, being confined to their beds. This old chap, lying on his straw mattress, doesn't look too happy. Still, he was well looked after, and maybe he was cheered by a visit from Nell Gwynn. She was a Hereford girl, and it's said she often visited the patients here. These are just some of the many fascinating exhibits to be found in this unusual little museum. A short distance from Coningsby, there's a museum of a very different kind. The Herefordshire climate and soil are ideally suited for growing the wide variety of apples needed for the making of fine ciders, for which this county is famous. Here, at the Cider Museum, we can rediscover some of the methods used in days gone by. The process starts with the crushing of the apples. This old mill is typical of those used on many a Herefordshire farm in the days before mechanisation and mass production. Here again the farmer used his old friend, the horse, to do the hard work. Later, with the coming of engines, mobile crushing machines were used, and these could be trundled from farm to farm. The next stage, extracting the juice, hasn't changed all that much over the years, but the machinery has. You're unlikely to overlook this massive beam press, which is over 300 years old. The apple juice was fermented, then matured in oak vats, like these, which date from Napoleonic times. On the farm, bottling was a simple affair, but in time the factories took over. This bottling plant dates from the 1920s. Until required, the cider would be stored in large, cool cellars, such as these. As well as the making of ordinary cider, the museum also has interesting exhibits on many associated crafts, such as champagne cider making and the distillation of cider brandy. At the shop, you can buy a wide variety of gifts, including their own excellent cider and cider brandy. The whole of this museum, now independently run, is housed in what was once the original Bulmer's cider factory. The boardroom has been preserved intact as a reminder of those days. Later, Bulmer's moved to a rather larger site, but their visitors' centre is still only next door to the cider museum. And here too you will find a warm welcome.
You said you pump the cider from one vat to another and filter it.
There are guided tours of the mill, showing their wide range of ciders being made, and best of all, ending up with a chance to try them for yourself.
Yeah, that's nice, wasn't it? Not a gold, we said. What do we say? Pears.
This is a medium dry.
Medium dry, blend of pears. And it's about 8% alcohol.
Bulmer's is the name that most people associate with Herefordshire cider. But there are other producers working on a much smaller scale in the traditional way, like Ivor and Susie Dunkerton, who specialise in cider made from organically grown apples of the old original varieties, grown in their own orchards and processed in their small country mill near Pembroke. Their exclusive and delicious cider is sold in London's top stores, as well as locally, and here in the small shop that adjoins the mill.
It's still not quite that.
What about the cordial? How sweet is that? Well, that's medium dry, and single varieties we do dry.
The last of the apples have fallen in the orchards, but at Queenswood Country Park, near Leominster, the trees are in their full autumnal glory. What a feast of colour there is to be seen at this time of the year. Besides the beauty of the autumn colours, there are a few surprises to discover as well. No wonder it's so popular with school parties. Nature lovers can enjoy this park right through the year, and it's all free. The visitors' centre and cafe are also interesting. They're housed in two old buildings rescued from demolition, the old tannery from Leinster and the 300-year-old Essex Arms from Hereford. Even when the leaves have fallen and the trees are bare, they are still beautiful with their branches forming patterns against the winter sky. Winter in the countryside has its compensations, like a cheerful fire to gather round on a cold, dark evening. This is the time for storytelling and the spinning of a good yarn.
So we went upstairs, sat in, had a cup of coffee and biscuits, and my wife went off to bed, and I nodded off to sleep for a few minutes. I suddenly woke up, and I watched a James Cagney film. As I was watching, I could feel this form in the doorway, I could see a form in the doorway.
When it comes to ghost stories, it's hard to beat the small border town of Kington, which has been buzzing with them for centuries. Most of these stories seem to be associated with the haunted house of Hargest Court. Nowadays it is a private residence and not open to the public, but once it was the home of the notorious Vaughan family. These are the effigies of Thomas Vaughan, known as Black Vaughan, and his wife, Ellen the Terrible, who are buried in the church of St. Mary. In the Wars of the Roses, Thomas, despite his 69 years, fought bravely for the Yorkists at the Battle of Banbury, where he was killed in 1469. One of the many legends has it that, ever since, the ghost of his great black dog has haunted the house and its surroundings. There are still those who won't come near this place at night, and others who even claim to have seen the ghost itself. The apparition is said to have appeared before a death in the family, and it is thought that this is the story which inspired Conan Doyle to write his Hound of the Baskervilles. It seems that the good folk of Kington have been troubled over the years by various other ghostly visitations. But fortunately, these were exorcised with bell, book and candle in the church. Unlike its ghosts, the town itself is a friendly place. It's the oldest town in the county after Hereford, having existed before King Offa built his dyke. Its present name, meaning Royal Town, was possibly given to it by Edward the Confessor, or perhaps an earlier monarch. In the hills behind, the highest golf course in England provides a lot of enjoyment for players who appreciate spectacular views.
That was a bit nasty, Ali. Now, come on.
These members have certainly chosen a fine way to spend a winter's morning.
Oh, well played. Cheers, Glenn. Well done, Glenn. Well done. You did nearly try to talk you out of it.
Others might prefer a brisk walk across somewhere like Bringsty Common. If you don't mind the cold, it can be a rewarding experience. As the festive season approaches, all over the county they're gathering mistletoe for the Christmas market. It could well be that it was from an old orchard like this that the spray decorating your home was picked. To our pagan ancestors, mistletoe was a symbol of fertility. And even today, our festivities just wouldn't seem the same without it. So you'd expect it to grow well in Herefordshire. And so the year comes to its close. But even now, in the bleakest depths of winter, new life is beginning to stir. And with it comes the promise that each lengthening day will bring us closer to another spring. Once more, the unchanging pattern of seasons will begin to unfold in this lovely, unspoiled corner of England we call Herefordshire.